Yep. Thank you so much, Frank. Thanks everybody for joining. Excited to be here and honored to be introducing Mark for the discussion. Mark's a senior principal consulting engineer and America's lead for hospitality at HPE Aruba Networking. He's got a master's of science and data science and cybersecurity from the University of Memphis. He spent 30 years in the wireless networking industry, tracing back to Symbol Technologies and Motorola, with more than 11 years at HPE. He's bringing deep technical experience, expertise paired with data-driven approach to solving real-world hospitality challenges. And thankfully for us, he spent the last 5 years focusing on the hospitality vertical, specializing in strategic integrations, network and analytics, and API operationalization, helping key partners, MSPs, and hotel brands build out their own monitoring dashboards, automated workflows, and data pipelines using HP Aruba Central and GreenLake platforms. Recently, he's been working on MSP dashboard development, multi-tenant network operations tooling, and agentic AI framework for NOC automation, as well as pioneering the use of MCP, model context protocols, and natural language interface for network management. So obviously a lot of experience and excited to hear his presentation today. So thank you so much. Cool. Mark.
Thank you. Appreciate it, guys. Can everybody hear me okay? Take that
Yes.
Yes.
as a yes. Okay, fantastic. Good. And Sandy, I appreciate you doing the slides. That'll be great. I'm going to use some notes as well, but thank you very much. I think the idea today, and again, as Frank said, please stop me in the middle if you have some questions, comments, thoughts. I'm glad to go through it. I have about 12 slides, so I think we'll get through it relatively quickly. It's not too technical, although you'll be able to tell from my passion and the introduction that I'm kind of very interested in kind of the data science piece and what that helps from a business outcome standpoint, right? So I think on this first slide, right, a lot of it is around. We've all been talking about. We hear AI in every comment and every session. I know I've listened to a bunch of podcasts where people say, you're going to have to take a drink every time you say AI because it's just in every word and in every presentation. So I'm going to try to show more on the data side, what's there today. But I think the idea is, a lot of times we stand in front of ownership or stand in front and we need you from a hospitality standpoint, you're looking for some kind of an upgrade request, right? It's either something's going on in the network, something's not working properly, it's a timing thing. But at the end of the day, it has to be a data-driven decision, right? That's somebody needs to have proof as to why you need to upgrade, what you need to change, what you need to expand, and so forth, right? So the idea is to kind of come back and leave you with some thought-provoking ideas around some different ways to look at the data, different ways to look at some of the analytics, and potentially to leave you with a framework that you can use in the next capital review. Next slide. Right. So I think this kind of talks about these three columns, and I'll lay some new concepts on you, something we're calling HEM, something we're calling using Shapley math in a little bit. But I think, depending on, regardless of whose network you have, right, whether it's HPE or some of the other manufacturers, all of this data, this telemetry is available, right? APs have telemetry data that they're logging. The cloud environment, even if it's an on-prem environment, has data that's available. And when I talk about data, we have network application data, we have auth events, we have RSSI or signal strength, right? All of this data is available, right? And a lot of this is pretty interesting, right? For those that are either managing it themselves or using LSPs or service providers, the knock in theory has that data. It might be in a dashboard, it might not be in a dashboard, but it's very, sort of technical language, right? There's not a business insights or a business layer to help understand, what's going on, right? Somebody says the Wi-Fi is slow. What does that mean? Uh, that could mean a number of different things going on in an environment, right? Rather than get into all the technical nuance of that, right? That's today we're making investments and upgrades and expansions and moving into Wi-Fi 7 and the 6 gigahertz band because we are supposed to or because we think we need to, but and that may be the case, um, but we need to have the data behind it, right? That's the idea, right? All of these things that are on instinct, right? We don't want to move to Wi-Fi 7 or the 6 gigahertz band just because the competitor has it in our environment. We need to know what business value it's going to bring, right? That's the concept. So it's really not a data problem. It's really a translation problem, right? And that's what I want to try to help you move past. And next slide, please, Sandy. Let me make sure you're on the same slide that I'm looking at. Yes, perfect. So this is a little bit of a busy slide, right? I'm going to try not to say AI too much, but let's just say, what does the network see? What is the sense? What do we see, right? We talked a little bit at the different levels. RSSI, these are all signal strength information that we know what's happening from a client standpoint, right? So all of that data is being logged. It's telemetry in your environment, what we call signal to noise ratio, which ultimately very much defines whether a client's going to have in theory, a good experience outside of DHCP, DNS, and other things going on in the environment, right? All of that is logged. That telemetry is available. Channel utilization on the AP is available, right? You have all these, what we call behavioral signals, right? What's the roaming environment look like? Did somebody try to connect and they're having issues? When we say abandonment, meaning did somebody try to connect 3 times and run into a problem and then just not keep going, not report it? That's what I call kind of an abandonment signal. That data is available, right? The analytics and the network can read that coverage quality and dead zones and kind of perform probability environments, right? That's the idea of these signal categories from a connectivity standpoint, right? This coverage, density, stress, what I call densification in some cases, right? All of these, the telemetry turns into these sort of signals. And then I can turn some of these signals into behavioral insights, right? I can help figure out from the telemetry what is the idea of this idea of something we're kind of coming up with. And you may have heard this before as a idea of a guest friction index or a GFI or a guest friction score, right? And obviously you want to have that in the 100% range, less than 1. That's the idea that we want to kind of get to, right? And then ultimately the analytics and these temporal signals, right? Sort of peak load, event correlation spikes, guest spikes in different areas in the property. Could be in the lobby, could be in restaurant areas, could be in outdoor areas. All of those spikes and would potentially impact revenue, either again, abandonment, people not coming, people not redoing or coming back for another stay, or conference is a big one, right? We have a lot of conference areas. Conference is a big potential area of revenue. And if we're affecting conference capabilities, then we're potentially affecting revenue on a big one, right? So in a few slides, I'm going to give you kind of a use case that focuses on these temporal signals, right? Around maybe there's a convention Tuesday through Thursday as an example, and we get this big congestion going on. We need to know that, and we need to know what the potential revenue impact is and what the opportunity is to resolve it, right? Because that impacts your revenue and guest stays all the time. All right, next slide, please. So I could probably spend almost the whole time on this. This is a lot of different features, a lot of different kind of concepts here, right? So this is something, and you're welcome to start using this in your own presentations. Obviously, we just kind of came up with this as a concept, right? And we actually are taking this from something else that you may have heard in another environment called a large experience model, where in the background there's some capturing of Zoom and Teams data to help with, predictive analysis on video on networks, right? In terms of scoring, predictability, and what might affect that. And so the idea was to kind of create what's called a HEM, a hospitality experience model, right? Where you're going to weigh this with multi-factors, almost kind of like a MOS score, if you will, that we do on voice calls already, right? As we said earlier, we have a lot of the telemetry already, right? You have AP signals, you have all of the client auth, you have the client signals. I know network applications, what the client is doing in the environment. If you think about adding, PMS data to this, right? How many times are they connecting to the property management system just in terms of getting on the network? What's that percentage? And then I start adding this idea of SHAP or Shapley math. And those that have any data science background or modeling would know that this kind of comes from a kind of a game theory background, right? Not the idea of a zero sum game, but the idea that there are factors in game theory where different components have different contribution layers to the ultimate score, to a driver and a ranking. So if you think about putting a weight on SNR data, putting a weight on auth events, putting a weight on session logs, putting a weight on capacity planning. So if you start kind of putting all those different weights together, you start being able to use some of the Shapley math to help rank different things and score them. And so you have ultimately you're able to build what's called kind of this HEM score, right? So I'll pause there for a second. I was just, I know I've been talking for a few minutes. If anybody has any questions, this might be a good time to ask them. If not, I can definitely keep going.
And you can throw it in the chat or I guess throw it in the
Yes.
chat so that we can keep recording, right, Sam?
Yeah, that'd be great, Frank. Thank you. Yep. I'll let you guys monitor that and I can keep going. All right. So we're going to spend probably a majority of the time back on this concept of a GFI, a guest friction index, right? Because ultimately all of this contributes to the guest friction index, which gets back to the original premise of a data-driven decision on when, why you need to upgrade or do you need to upgrade and what does it make sense to go to, right? Because ultimately that's what converts into dollars, right? So yes, next slide, please. So why a GFI score, guest friction index score? So a little bit about what this might be, as you can kind of see on the slide, right? We have a baseline of 1.0 there, right? That's kind of our baseline for GFI. And if we start looking at kind of this SHAP again, right? The idea is it's kind of borrowed from economics, right? So it's been around a long time. And for those of that involved in data science, econometrics, started out with regression analysis testing. So econometrics is a kind of the econ and statistics is another form of data science. So it's been around a long time. And from a Shapley standpoint, right, we're using this to figure out how much each factor pushed a score up or down, right? That's the idea. Instead of just giving you a black box number, right? And we'll take you through that in a little bit here, right? So if you use this example here, property A has this 2.4, right? It's above this threshold. How did it get to there, right? Well, we used some of the factors to kind of figure out and build this GFI, right? And all this data is available in all the telemetry on the networks, right? Using the network as a sensor, right? So you had some issues with a meeting area, right? There wasn't enough AP density and AP coverage or capacity, right? So that gave a factor of 0.6, right? You had a number of auth failures maybe you had radius issues at that time that contributed a factor as well. And then you had some, because of the dead zone areas, you had some peak drop rates, right? All of those contributed to this factor to build it all the way up to a 2.4 compared to a baseline without even getting guest satisfaction surveys, without even looking at knock analysis, right? If for those of us that have been doing this a long time, if I gave you these 3 to 4 different points, you would quickly make an assumption that there's probably a potential issue with the network. I'm probably not getting the value that I planned on getting out of it. And I, likely need to go either do some reconnaissance or go look at what are some of my options to upgrade, right? And maybe this potentially exceeded revenue or is hurting my revenue plans for the year, right? The idea is to leave it, right. This is, as we go back to the first thing, you know, on our first slide where we talked about guests say the Wi-Fi is slow or I'm having an issue and it's not working properly. The idea was this is not a hunch, right? This is a direct connection to an investment signal, right? You have these 3 factors accounting for this guest friction index score. So hopefully you guys, this is kind of resonating, right? This hospitality experience model with the telemetry and analytics and the Shapley math contribution behind it, connecting to a concept of a GFI or a guest friction index score.
Mark, can you give a real quick
Yeah.
example of something that would reduce that score? I mean, baseline is 1.0. Can you get below 1.0? All your examples
Are
increase the
put,
friction.
yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the easiest one to explain. Yeah, I think as we start going through the rest of the slides, you'll see some of that example of how it stays around the baseline. But if I don't do that, Frank, I'll come back to that. Absolutely. That's a great question. And you're on the next slide, Sandy? Yes, yep, perfect. So I would almost call this kind of an anchor metric, right? So I think this is the one that Frank was kind of alluding to, right? 1.0 was my baseline, right? But how am I getting to these things, right? So coverage gap, in this case, I built it as a 25% weight, but that's not necessarily, depends on the math and what makes sense in your environment, right? These are things that are changeable from a machine learning model standpoint, right? Those of us that are doing kind of these modeling can ultimately change these scores. But if I'm seeing sessions drop, I'm seeing applications not working properly, I'm seeing a systemic problem throughout, I would weight that as a 4.40% in this case, right? Or if I got friction less than 1.0, right? Then I'm going to have a citable evidence in my analytics to show that. So to Frank's point, what would make this better, right? If you flip this and go, I'm having very low percentage onboarding issues, right? I'm not seeing any DHCP issues. I'm not seeing any DNS issues. I'm seeing application capacity, and I'm seeing my egress out not getting managed 75 to 80%. I'm not hitting any of my insights that I'm kind of watching and measuring for. I'm seeing consistent guest SNR and fast roaming in my environment, right? Hopefully not just on the knock screens, but hopefully there's insights that are being shown on the dashboard as well. Those are the ways, as an example, Frank, that you would lower your guest friction score to either the 1.0 or just under 1.0, right? But 1.0 is kind of my baseline, right? And again, this is not a spec sheet. This is, machine learning. These are telemetry and analytics that's available, right? And so you
Actual,
take
not
these,
theoretical. Yeah.
yeah, these are actual data numbers that's available in the telemetry today, right? Nobody is delivering this as a manufacturer that I'm aware of, but the whole point is to tie the telemetry from the network together, to tie the telemetry from the PMS together. You may be tying the telemetry from other tools that are measuring. There could be things like there could be something like a UXI, like a sensor that's measuring application framework in the environment. You might have a back of house that has certain requirements for internal and external. It's taking all of those components together and kind of building this idea of this guest friction index. Yep, exactly. And a lot of it is location, timing, presence analytics. Where is it happening? Or from a RevPAR standpoint, right? We have a lot of revenue tied to outdoor events, tied to maybe we have pool areas and those kinds of things for families and other environments. A lot of it could be tied to that as well. We have it tied to conference, and so the whole idea of this, and Frank, that's a great lead-in for me, is this the Shapley math and the contribution to each. Maybe I want the outdoor and the conference area to have a higher component or a higher ranking or a higher percentage that contributes to this versus other parts of the network, right? And the whole idea is you can kind of build this model and use this as positive proof for when you need to potentially make changes and not just go in and kind of with a gut feeling, or it's a 4-year time. Okay, it's time to change the network. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Maybe it's a time to kind of upgrade certain parts of the network, right? Maybe it's conference that needs to get upgraded, but not necessarily guest rooms. There's a lot of different analytics that point to this that's available in the data to kind of build these pieces out.
Great. Just to confirm, so this is
Yes.
scoring the network itself. It is not a guest journey score at all. It's the overall infrastructure and how it is actually performing that you're scoring.
Yeah, exactly. But it does include the guest journey. So the guest journey is part of it.
The
Yes.
overall, not a specific. Okay. And
Yeah,
then
exactly.
just to be sure, at some point, are you going to give us a little information on where this data lives? You kind of let in where it is now, but when you're gathering it all together, where do you put it all and who does that? And is it in the cloud? Is it local? Obviously, most of our hoteliers are probably thinking right now, I can't possibly do this. Who do I get to do it? So that's part of your talk, I hope.
It can be at the end. So yes, I will. I will definitely make sure to address that as far as where the data lives in terms of on-prem versus cloud, and what are some of the availability to kind of build this out. Exactly. Yes. Great point. And if you'll switch to the next slide, Sandy. So this slide moves into the idea of some machine learning in here and how we've sort of collected, we've talked about the guest friction index. We've talked about um, the hospitality experience model. We've talked about where some of the Shapley math kind of comes into this from a contribution standpoint. And now we've collected all that data together, and now we're kind of into this machine learning modeling, right? A propensity model, if you will, to collect all this data. And now what, right? We're going to collect, let's just say, for example, we've collected RSSI data. That's what we call signal or signal to noise data. We've connected data on the network around the AP channel utilization, right? We've collected, capacity on APs, both in room, throughout the property, meeting, outdoor, and let's just say we've collected this for 12 months, right? We also connected it to PMS. What's the occupancy? Well, how many people connected on PMS? How many people connected on guest? And we've been able to kind of take this and put it into a machine learning model that will give you a score, right? That will ultimately give you a propensity on when it makes sense. What's the upgrade propensity? And inside there, you would have a GFI trend, right? Over the baseline, over, different 90-day periods, could be a 12-month period. It'll give you a revenue impact model, right? What was the revenue that was potentially impacted? And if you made the change, what is the revenue that, potentially could be collected in different parts of the environment, right? And then it'll kind of conceptually build out an ROI for that, right? Depending on that. I don't know anything about, what things cost and what the network infrastructure costs. This is just the idea around what was in the environment today to be able to show you what the analytics are, right? So the idea was to build out this model so that, 3 weeks before a conference, you might have this data ahead of time, based on previous information, as an example, to know, wow, I need to either upgrade the conference space or I need to add capacity in the conference space, depending on what makes the most sense. But the idea is collecting this data and putting into kind of a propensity model, right? So that ahead of time, and you can have conversations with the GM around when it makes sense to do that, right? Is this kind of helping Frank at least describe some of this? I know I haven't talked about where the data lives, but ultimately this is what we want to try to get to.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think
Right.
you're moving in that
Right.
direction.
Yep. And I think the idea is, and I want to leave you with this, is with this idea of collecting all this data and putting it into a guest friction index concept and a hospitality experience model, right? If you see a trend happening, right, where it's kind of going up for a period of time, um, it's going to automatically, the idea is build up this business case for you, right? So you start having different reasons in this upgrade propensity, right? So if you go back to numbers, if one is a baseline, and I'm kind of a numbers, data science person. So if I use upgrade propensity as a one baseline, I see different scores pushing that upgrade propensity, right? I see the guest friction index, rising 2.0 over 2 for a period of time for 3 months. Okay, that's going to push that propensity index up. Same kind of thing on the conference space as well. How often did I have dropped sessions? How often did I not be able to meet my capacity? Right? Those kinds of things start pushing it up, and then my upgrade propensity obviously goes above 1.0, and now you start having real data to make real decisions. Next slide, please. All right, so I think we talked a little bit about this, but I wanted to try to leave you kind of a sense detect, right? This is kind of what's happening in the environment, right? You're detecting all of this data, right? We're collecting all of the network sensor analytics. We're connecting the other analytics in the environment and the other telemetry, and we're building out these scores, right? And then, the math is helping figure out which piece should have the highest weight and the highest ranking, right? In my case, you could see I kind of put red as failures and peak congestion in my case, but again, you have options to define what is the most important for you, right? Could be conference space, could be outdoor, right? That's an area that you can kind of define, right? And if you look at the business case piece, right? This is an example. If you had that many corporate events, potentially it showed that you might have a $420,000 revenue impact, right? That is real data that can really be delivered to GMs to help make decisions on where you're trying to get to, right? And ultimately, then you start seeing your GFI when you make these changes. Again, now we measure this and we see it kind of sitting right around, our goal is to have it right at the baseline of a 1.0 where we know our network is operating as designed, right? Every number comes from collecting data and modeling it in the environment, not just thinking that it's 4 years, we need to make a change, or we see the Wi-Fi is running slow, or somebody's guest said it was running slow, but we don't really have any data to define what that means, right? Again, it's all around giving you a way to make data-driven decisions. Next slide, please. Right, so now you kind of define let's just say some costs, right? Again, this is part of this modeling propensity, the costs of the problem. How did I get to those numbers, right? Um, let's just say as an example, right? And again, your numbers could be different. I put $45 per session for, and then there was, our GFI based on that score showed I had about 80% confidence level. And then how much would you need to upgrade your APs for higher density, what I call a densification, right? That would be what you would be looking at from a numbers standpoint, right? And then you put this into kind of a model, and ultimately you're going to have a positive output. And how much potentially is at risk, right? Based on the number of events. This idea was around building this for conference space, but it could be around, as I said, other areas of the property, could be in the guest space. Maybe the numbers are going to be slightly different, right? And it's putting this into a machine learning propensity model based on all of the data that we've collected. So I know this is a lot of sort of technical information um, and modeling, and it's probably some new concepts. So um, I'll probably try to finish off rather than getting into some of the technical stuff, and maybe open it up to questions in case people have them. Let me see where I am on my next slide. I only have a few left to
Yeah, let's
finish. So yeah,
remember this slide. This one's my favorite so far as a hotelier, like from the decision making. But let's go. Yeah.
yes, yes. Let me see which one you're on. Next one, please, Sandy. Yeah. So um, I think this is I did a good job of not saying AI in here, but then I just said AI. So let's just talk in this autonomous loop, right? The other thing I want you to know is this is the idea is we're not just collecting this and then basically just building it once. This is kind of a loop, right? We're going to sense this, collect it, run it, your score, your model, your HEM model's running, your GFI score, it says it's scored not as an example, scores nightly here, but depending on, what the framework is, depending on your sense of need, and depending on the type of property, maybe this is something that's could be run, every hour, right? From an analytics and insight standpoint, right? That's the idea, right? And maybe, right? We talked about kind of not making gut-based decisions, but making data-driven decisions, using the network to help build those and verify those investment decisions. But part of this could also be while you're running kind of this loop, maybe before you're even planning, a large full upgrade, maybe there are certain parts of the network, right? And I'll pick on the conference space because I know that's always one that's near and dear to me when I work on a lot of big hoteliers, right? Because that's where a lot of the dollar and extra revenue comes in. If I know right away that I'm showing capacity issues or densification issues or RF design, SNR, signal issues there, channel utilization issues there, right? That loop is going to automatically be running, and I can send an alert, build a business case, not necessarily in the 3 years from an upgrade standpoint, but maybe it's something that needs to be done within 18 months after you put something in, right? Or even after that. And then again, this also measures, right? The verified piece in the last bucket there. We need to have a constant measurement loop to know kind of what we're doing in our environment, right? And then maybe we start a new baseline after we've made those changes, right? So you as the operator, right? You set those rules and stress and thresholds, right? The network and the modeling is not making unsupervised decisions, right? We have this idea of self-driving networks helping design and make updates. But at the end of the day, we definitely want to have human in the loop to kind of help understand what's going on in the environment and what investment we need to make, right? So my little example there, I won't read it there for you, but I think ultimately It talks about having an agent running that, that drafts a business case. That is certainly something that could be part of this model as well, right? You could be running an agent that has a connection to an LLM that automatically will take the data and draft a business case. That's an option as well. Doesn't have to be that dramatic or that intense, but that's ultimately where we want to try to get to. The idea is to have the network and the autonomous intelligence loop running so that you don't have to worry about some of these operational challenges, right? So that you're automatically updated. You automatically know what is the best operation that I need to run and to help make that work. Right? The network's already doing it, right? We're already have this self-driving piece. Now we need to kind of add some of these other components to help build that friction index and ultimately a score that you know how your network is operating. Next slide, please. All right, so I really like this one, all right, because I think these questions haven't changed, right? It's just a matter of how do you answer them, right? Right. So if I talk about some of those things on the questions at the end, without using some of the analytics that we're gathering, right? This is very much around a gut check, right? You think you need to make a change or an upgrade in the network, but you don't have enough data to show that, right? So how do you do that? And we've all been struggling with this, myself as well, for a long time, right? We work on this right now in a lot of different environments, especially now as Wi-Fi 7 is coming, kind of proliferating through the environment, right? Started at home. A lot of hoteliers are in the middle of either upgrade cycles, you know, changes to their network. Wi-Fi 7 brings a lot of potential options. Do I need to change my cabling? Do I need to change my switches for power and for higher density ports? A lot of big questions around Wi-Fi 7. And, obviously, as a business slash sales engineering person, there's a lot of different hats that I have to run. Operations look at it one thing, GMs look at it and one thing. Wi-Fi 7 is a great example of what do I do around this Wi-Fi, this guest friction index and this scoring model. This would be a great example to help you make those decisions, because do you need to do a wholesale upgrade? Where is the guest friction index pointing? Maybe a lot of us have been thinking, wow, let's just put Wi-Fi 7 in conference, but I don't have enough data to show my value. Here's an example with the analytics, and some of the data that you're collecting in this model to help you know what's the conference space look like from a GFI and HEM model standpoint, right? So I really like that concept. I hope that's something that will resonate with you. And I think if you go to the next slide, I'm probably at the end. Yep. Let me make sure you're on the same slide, Sandy. Yes, you are. So this is great, right? I appreciate your time. I think we left a few minutes. I want to leave you with this sort of concept. Your network as a sensor, whatever network you have, it's constantly learning. It's gathering data. The telemetry is there. Everything runs on the network, right? Not just guests today. It really has to be a kick-ass network to be able to support and run, obviously, the guest side, but your back of house environment could be a vendor network with IoT and security that's involved. So everything on the network is constantly learning, constantly collecting, and constantly available from a telemetry standpoint, right? Lots of data is available to help make this, right? And I think I'll open up or leave. Frank, I don't think I answered the one question you had around where.
Yeah, and I
So
have two more. Go ahead.
okay, yeah. So Do we need to stop recording, or I don't know what the
I
process is
think
for?
Sandy has to stop once a attendee is asking a question, but
Okay. Yeah, yeah, gotcha.
Sandy will do. We know Sandy will do that at the right time.
Okay. Yep. So if you think about like where is this data being collected? If you have an on-prem environment, most likely it's the data is being collected in some type of a controller environment or a gateway environment somewhere. The only challenge with an on-prem environment in this case is, as a lot of you know, I just don't have enough capacity to store, 12 months of this data. And then where do I do my workloads in terms of some of my modeling and some of my classification methods and some of the information I would do to kind of build out these models. So there is data available on-prem, but certainly in the cloud in terms of the elasticity, the amount of data that's being collected, the telemetry, it's far more if you have a cloud environment for your network. So I
Okay.
hope that helps answer that one, Frank.
That helps some, but maybe we can come back to it a little bit.
Yeah,
First, I wanted to say I wish I'd seen this quite some time ago this spring in one of our largest hotels. We got a group to come back because they said if you upgrade your Wi-Fi, we'll come back. So we spent some money on Wi-Fi and they came back. And you know, what does that mean? I don't know if we hit what
right.
they were what they were thought felt was lacking or what, but I think the biggest thing here for me right now is these terms, the guest friction index, HEM, SHAPA. Is your group creating these terms, or is there within your employer, or is there some larger group that you're working with, and that these are sort of open, um, published things that anybody can use, and you're here promoting this approach that can be sort of non-proprietary.
Ooh, that was a mouthful. I got to think how to answer all of that, Frank.
I probably
Um,
didn't ask it in the most expeditious way,
no, no, it's all good.
but I'm sure that's
So
on a lot of people's minds right now.
yeah, yeah. So no, it's a great question. So the Shapley part is all public data science stuff. That's Shapley math is something that's been around for a long time, and many models use that to help with weighting. So that's publicly available. Machine learning propensity is a concept that's been around for quite a while, right? Those of us in the data science space know that. This idea of an HEM framework or a hospitality experience model is honestly something that I personally came up with, and I'm promoting it internally. But it's not. I don't know if it's going to be something that my employer takes as a concept, but I don't have any reason why it couldn't be a publicly available thing to start using as an idea.
So the combination of those three then would make the guest friction index something that's just sort of becomes an
Yep.
industry tool available to anyone. Okay, I
Yeah,
think
exactly.
that part of that is really important.